reach heaven's joys, O bright and sun. Heart of my heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, O ruler.
Hello, and welcome back to our study of the book of Genesis, the book of beginnings. Last time we saw that Jacob returned to the homeland, what eventually would be known as the nation of Israel, the land of Israel. When he returned, he went to the area of Shechem. There was trouble there. Dinah was raped. Two of her brothers committed a rather violent, a terribly violent act, which cost them ultimately in terms of inheriting the seed promise. Then we also saw God call Jacob to Bethel, back to the place where the original commitment had been made, especially the vow that was made by Jacob himself. In addition to that, we got to see the end of the life of Isaac, that great man of faith, and his sons bury him, the two of them apparently content with one another at that particular time, certainly getting along at least. And then we observe that there's an entire chapter that deals with Esau's descendants. There are several names in there that you'll find of interest in a deeper study. You probably would want to go in and look at some of those. For example, one of the friends of Job was the descendant of one of the children of Esau. And so you'd want to check that out as you make your way along. But our goal is to look at the beginnings particularly of this great family of promise and see where that's leading. And by this time we get to chapter 37. And chapter 37 is a very, very familiar story with many powerful lessons. It is the story of continued friction in a family brought on by favoritism. Start at verse 1 of Genesis 37 and observe. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. Yet they really still didn't own enough property to settle on. They're basically nomads. They live in tents. And that fact is brought up in Hebrews chapter 11. It's significant. Why? Because they're not interested in an earthly city built with human hands. Instead, their ultimate goal is to live with God. And that is what's much, much more important to them than anything else. So here he is, living now in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. I've got to confess that probably because of the rest of the story of Joseph, I tend to give him the benefit of the doubt. I give him a break every time we come along. But it's interesting that the word dibah here in the Hebrew, the word that is used for bad report, that typically that wherever else that occurs in the Old Testament, it is at its very best a derogatory report. And at worst, it is deceitfully slanderous. So we would call, at the minimum, we would call Joseph a little tattletale. He's bringing this back to besmirch the character of his brothers. He's trying, apparently, to get them into trouble. That apparently is what's going on at this time. And we've got to recognize it because it's right there in front of us. Now verse 3 of Genesis 37. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. Also he made him a tunic of many colors. Two things here that make Joseph the subject of jealousy. The first, he really had no control over. His dad loved him more than all the other boys, all the other children. That's significant. It comes from a family history, you may recall. Isaac had loved Jacob more than Esau, had loved Esau more than Jacob. Rebekah had loved Jacob more than Esau. Now, here we see it being repeated. Jacob loves the first child of his favorite wife, his beloved wife, Rachel. He loves Joseph more than any other, and that's bound to cause friction, bound to create jealousy. But then there comes a second thing, and in a way, Joseph can do nothing about this, but we want to observe what he does with it. His father gives him a coat of many colors. Now, more recent translations have struggled with how to deal with this. It may not have been a coat of many colors. It may have been a coat with long sleeves. But whatever the case is, in either case, the coat is so designed as to be the coat of a very important man. A man who doesn't so much do the work as he does observes it, or something along that order. And this is going to be a source of more trouble, particularly because of how Joseph deals with the coat. And so let's look at verse 4. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now, they hated him. The Hebrew word hate, according to Klaus Westermann, is a word that is different in meaning to what you and I are used to. It is a deed or the inception of a deed. To practice this kind of hate is like pulling the bowstring taut. It has no purpose unless an arrow is then unleashed. By the same token, hate makes no sense unless one follows through with a corresponding deed. This is a hatred that is going to motivate, generally it's going to motivate to murder. It's a strong word. It's a sad word in this family. A family once more divided, torn because of favoritism. His brothers hated him. Hated him because his dad loved him more. They also hated him because of his coat that demonstrated that he loved him more, but they get some more opportunities. And here's where Joseph for sure has an opportunity not to antagonize them, but he does anyway. Listen to the way that it develops, beginning as we go along to the very next verse, verse 5. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. See, he didn't have to tell the dream. He had the dream, true enough, but he could have kept it to himself. Wouldn't do that. Probably was wearing that coat of many colors, another source of antagonism, while he told them about the dream. And here's what he said. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream that I have dreamed." And you know the story. They were all out in the field binding their sheaves, he and his other brothers. And his sheaves stood up tall, and all the other brothers' sheaves bowed down to his sheaf. Well, everybody knew what that meant. They all said, "Oh, you think you're going to rule over us, huh?" Well, they hated him all the more. And you can, at least in part, understand why. Verse 9 then tells us, "Then he dreamed still another dream, and he told it to his brothers." Now, he didn't have to do that again. Could have kept it quiet, but no, he told it. He says, "Look, I've dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me." So he told it to his father and his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" And his brothers envied, but his father kept the matter in mind. Well, Jacob understood the meaning of the dream, and I'm sure the brothers did as well. Everybody could understand what was going on. Who, by the way, would be the mother in this instance? By now, it can only be Leah. Rachel's gone. And so the only wife in the family that's left is Leah. But are Jacob and Leah going to bow down to? Are they going to be subservient to Joseph? That's the question. Jacob asks it, and then he keeps it in his heart. That kind of reminds you of Mary, doesn't it? When she kept all the things about Jesus in her heart, Luke chapter 2, after that visit to the temple in the city of Jerusalem when Jesus was 12 years old. So, a lot of hatred, a lot of determination that we're going to kill our brother if we get the opportunity. Then the text goes a little bit further and tells us what happened between Joseph and his brothers. Verse 12 of chapter 37 says, "Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem." Now, Shechem is some 50 miles away. It's at least 2 days' journey away from where Jacob has settled. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." So he said to him, "Here I am." Then he said to him, "Please, go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me." So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Went 2 days' journey, at least, away from home. 17 years old, it's a lot of responsibility, but off he goes. Then, verse 15, we come to realize something. "Now a certain man found him, and there he was, wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, 'What are you seeking?' So he said, 'I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they're feeding their flocks.' And the man said, 'They have departed from here. For I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan.' So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan." Now Dothan's another 15 miles away, another whole day's journey almost away from home. He's now 3 days' journey. This is even further north that he has gone. He's gone to find his brothers. What do you suppose he's wearing? Well, again, I tell you, not too smart on Joseph's part, but we're going to find out real quickly what he was wearing. "Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near, they conspired against him to kill him." That's consistent. The word hated indicated that that's exactly what they wanted to do. And now, surely enough, here they are conspiring to kill their brother. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming." And boy, you can almost hear the dripping sarcasm that must have flowed from their lips at this point in time. This dreamer, literally, it could be translated, this master of dreams. He always sets himself forth as the great one in his dreams, and they don't like it. And they're going to take care of him as a result of it. So verse 20, "Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit. We shall say, Some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams." If they kill him, then he's not going to rule over them, is he? They're not going to bow down to him, are they? And that's exactly what they've got in mind. They're going to take out their own brother. But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to their father." This pit is a cistern. They would dig these pits some between 6 and 20 feet in depth. They would dig them in the wilderness because it was a dry area. And they would use them for a specific purpose, to catch water during the rainy season. When it was raining, these cisterns would fill up with water, and then they would have water to be able to drink out of. Not every well, as you will recall from the experience of Jacob earlier, not every well had flowing water in it. One of his did. This is a cistern to provide water. But during the dry season, they could become dry on the bottom. They cast their brother down into the pit. Now, Reuben's got an ulterior motive. He doesn't tell his brothers. but he's planning to save Joseph from their hands. Now, I don't know what motivated Reuben. I mean, he's the oldest. Maybe he always was responsible for taking care of his brothers and his sisters, for that matter. That may have been what motivated him. Or maybe he's trying to get back into the good graces of his father after the incident that we have already learned about. I don't know. But whatever the case may be, he intended to protect Joseph. That was his plan. Verse 21 or 22 is the one that reported that. In 23, though, apparently Reuben is gone somewhere. And we'll watch as this develops. So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him, and they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Can you imagine being that calloused? That you could have your brother down in the bottom of this pit thinking that he's going to die. And by the way, the word cast that is used there in the text is a word that is used for when they put a dead body in the ground. It's that word. Or it's used when they cast a body in a place expecting it to be a dead body. I'll give you an instance. You remember when Hagar and Ishmael left after Ishmael had made fun of Isaac at his party, his weaning party? Do you remember that as they left, they went to a certain area and the boy became faint and she cast him under a bush and then she went a distance away to wait while he died? Well, it's the same word. So they threw him in the pit expecting him to be a dead body. And then they sat down to have a meal. Now that's quite an attitude. But that's exactly what we see coming from them at this time. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing spices, balm and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. Now this place, Dothan, was right on a major route for one of the caravan routes. And on this particular occasion, Ishmaelites come. Now later they're going to be called Midianites, and you and I might say, wait a minute, that's two different people, and it is. But by the time you get to Judges, the two names are used interchangeably. I can't explain that entirely, I just know it's true. So these Ishmaelite traders come along, and what are they carrying? Spices. Why spices? Well, these are embalming spices. And they would have been used in Egypt for just what you would have expected them to be used for. They would be used to embalm bodies. But the slave trade was growing at this time. There was a high demand for slaves. And if they got the opportunity to take a slave along with them, well, you can imagine that they would not miss that opportunity. And in a sense, it's as good as condemning Joseph to death. It's just another route to the same end. And so, verse 26, so Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened. Well, I don't know what to say about Judah. One thing, he helped spare the life of Joseph, but the reasoning behind it is a little bit disturbing, don't you think? Let's not kill him. There's no profit in that. Let's sell him. He can die down in Egypt, and we'll make money off of it, and we won't be the ones to actually kill him. That seems to be the rationale that he uses. The other brothers are good with that rationale, and you'll soon find out why. The next verse, verse 28 of chapter 37 says, then Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up, lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Now think about it. 10 shekels of silver was a year's wages for a common laborer. In our society, what would that be? Be at least $20,000 a year? Something about like that. So this is 2 years' wages, 20 shekels, 2 years' wages for a common laborer. $40,000 in a modern language, if you want to put it that way. Now there were 10 of the brothers that were out there with the sheep, and so if you divide by 10, they each get $4,000. And $4,000 is 1/5 of an annual salary for a common laborer. Boy, this is a deal. They are making some money and getting rid of their pesky brother at the same time. The one that they hate, the one they want to kill. Then Reuben returned to the pit. And indeed, Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. I don't know where Reuben was. I suspect he'd gone to deal with the animals for a short time, maybe make sure they had food. He may not even have eaten first. I don't know. But whatever the case may be, he comes back and he finds the pit empty, and he thinks that they've done away with Joseph, apparently, because he tears his clothes. When a Jew, even today, tears their clothes, it is a sign of mourning. He was mourning what had happened to his brother. And he asks his brethren concerning this, or mourns in front of them, and they respond. He says to them, "The lad is no more, and where shall I go?" You see, he takes responsibility for his younger brother. And he's pleading with them, "What am I going to do now after what you've done?" Their answer: "So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, 'We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?'" Boy, this text is just full of information. First of all, the brothers come up with a solution. What's the solution? You don't have to tell Dad anything bad about what happened to Joseph. Let's take his coat, that we despise anyway, and let's dip it in blood. So they kill a kid of the goats. Now, you may ask yourself a question, as I've asked myself: when have we heard about a kid of the goats being killed before? Well, 2 kids were killed. And who were they killed by? They were killed by Jacob. They were killed by Jacob to be taken to his mother, Rebekah, so that she could fix savory food, tasted like, remember, wild animal? And he could serve it to his father Isaac and deceive him into believing that he was Esau so that he would receive the blessing. This is not the first time we've heard of a kid of the goats in reference to Jacob. And unfortunately, in this case, he's not the deceiver. He's going to be the deceived. And notice something else. They said that they would ask this question: "Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" Now, earlier they'd called him their brother, but in talking to Jacob, they plan to not even call him their brother. That's a lot of hatred. Kind of reminds you a little bit of the story Jesus told, doesn't it? The parable that we often call the parable of the prodigal son. His elder brother stayed at home. He worked all the time that the prodigal was gone, wasting his substance in riotous living. When he comes back, you remember that the father throws a big feast party, if you would. But the older brother, when he comes in from the field, hears about what's going on. He doesn't know what it is. He says, "Hey, what's going on?" And they tell him, "Well, your dad's throwing a party. Your brother's come back. He's back home." And the older brother won't go in. And you remember that the father goes out to him to plead with him to come on in. And the older brother says, "Here I've been with you this whole time, and you've never thrown a party for me. And yet, when this your son," do you hear the words? Same hatred seems to be exhibited in his attitude toward his brother. This your son, not my brother, your son. And how sad that is for them, for him, and also for these brothers of Joseph. In verse 33, we learn what Jacob did when he saw that bloody coat. And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his waist and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. There's a lot more here. Look at what it says. First of all, Jacob concluded, he drew his own conclusions. Based on the bloody coat, he decided Joseph had been killed. Had he been killed? Was he dead? You and I know the answer. No, he's not dead. He's very much alive. Jacob could have gone and rescued him had he realized that he was alive, or he could have. But he says he's dead. How did he come to that conclusion? In his own mind, it was the right conclusion. Bloody coat equals bloody son equals dead son, devoured by animals. Now, why do I point this out? Because it's possible for us in service to God to come to a conclusion that in our own minds is perfectly right, but in reference to the Bible, it's completely wrong. That's what Jacob did. His conclusion was false. He said, "I'll go down to Sheol." That's the grave in the Old Testament. It's the place of the dead. "I'll die mourning for my son." How sad. But the reality is quite different. And the closing verse of this chapter tells us that Joseph was taken by the Ishmaelites into Egypt and sold into slavery. His story is not over. In some ways, it has just begun.
May I reach heaven's joys,